Hey everyone, thanks again for joining us. My name's Carl Carpenter. I'm with Arrakis Consulting. I do consulting there, obviously. We previously did a real quick video about certifications and so on, the pros and cons of them. It was kind of quick, high level, not very detailed. Um, just to see what kind of interest people would get in relation to that. So, as a result of that video, we had several people reach out and said, "Hey, can you give us an idea of I want to get into IT, but I don't know what to do. What order should I take these tests in? What tests should I consider? Things like that." So we thought we'd make a video on that to help these guys out. And I was actually amazed how many people reached out asking this question, but it's still there. So we're going to do that to help everybody out. So this video is going to flesh out more. It's designed to basically start with three different paths. So we have on the left, we have the networking LAN support, and then we have cybersecurity, and then penetration testing. And then on the cybersecurity side, we're kind of isolating pen testing initially. So I do want to point out that we're not going to discuss every single certification that's out there because there's way too many to discuss. This video would be like 8 days long if we did that. We're only going to discuss the more popular ones like Microsoft, Cisco, CompTIA, ISACA, ISO, things like that. So you're not going to see things relating to like Oracle or VMware or any of the forensic certifications or any of that other stuff. But we'll hint around it, and we're also not going to have specific areas where we're not discussing paths in relation to database administration, because generally for some of these certifications, you start out at the lowest level possible, like desktop support or LAN support, and then you get some time under your belt and some basic certifications, and then you figure out you want to do database administration. So you kind of deviate. So we'll talk about that, when we get to it. So one important thing I think that everybody should understand is that not everyone's going to agree with this video, and that's okay. The video is really based on the experiences that I've had and the conversations I've had with other high-level people that have, had their own journey through the IT world and their experiences. So if you don't agree with the video or you think something's out of order, totally cool, no problem. I get it. I'm not living your life and you're not living my life. So it doesn't matter. This, again, is just a suggestion for those that are wondering what to do next. And I think the way we've listed it out on this video, you'll be able to see like, okay, well, I'm not at the beginning. I'm at kind of a little bit more advanced. So that means I'm right about here. So maybe this is what I should start considering, and this is the reason why. So that's good. I also want to point out that these certifications are designed, the way we put the certifications together, and my personal experiences and the experiences of others, are designed to help professionally develop the individual in such a way that the individual is more valuable to the company, and the individual shows value to potential clients. Which another way of looking at it is saying the individual can get raises or promotions or move from one company to another and get more money. So it's important to understand that as well. So we looked at it from not only the certification path, but also the job path and also the monetary path. Now, in some cases, before we start in on this, it's also important to understand that based on the industry you're in and the company you work for, sometimes it's better to actually leave a company, go work somewhere else, and then come back to get the raise you want or to get the promotion. A lot of times in IT, it's just the only way you can really advance is to, do as much as you can in one company and then move on to another company and do as much as you can there and then just go back to the first company. Certainly all possible. All right, so let's get into it. Essentially, I broke it down into 3 different tracks or paths here, where we have the networking or desktop support, LAN support, things like that on the left. We'll start about that one first because there's a lot of foundational material in there that directly translates to cybersecurity and pen testing. and then we'll talk about pen testing, or I'm sorry, cybersecurity, and then we'll talk about pen testing. Now, again, we're not going to talk about database administration because that's kind of something you figure out on your path, and you kind of, you take the fork in the road at that point and start doing database administration. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. I mean, you should do what's ever good for you, but it is what it is. We're also not going to mention anything about privacy, and the reason why is fairly simple. Privacy is something that you don't really need a technological background in order to do or implement. It's easier if you have a technical background, but you don't really need it. There's a lot of successful people in privacy that have zero clue how a computer works or what ACLs are in a Cisco router, or any router for that matter, or how VLANs work. They don't know and they don't care to know. But having said that, the more technical background you have, it's easier to do a privacy job. And as I always say, you can have security without privacy, but you can't have privacy without security. So, all right. So moving on, we're going to start on the left, talking about networking, and so this would be your desktop support, LAN support roles, things like that. And we're going to start at the very bottom of the totem pole, which in this drawing is at the top, because that's how IT is. Things at the bottom get talked about first, so they're at the top. So first off, if you don't know anything about computers and you're starting out, you really need to know how a computer works. So we're suggesting right off the bat that an A+ certification, so you understand what hard drives are, how hard drives work, what RAM is, what the different types of RAM is, and so on. And you'd be amazed at how valuable this A+ is going to be, even on the pen testing side. All right. So after you take this certification, you get your A+. I do want to point out that anything that's CompTIA related, you have a much higher chance of getting a government contract or a government job. So that's super important to know. So A+ is, while some people are going to be like, I don't need an A+ to do my job, and that may be fine, but if you want to get a government contract and they say you have to have an A+, then you're not going to get the contract unless you have an A+. It's kind of simple. And why I'm going to be discussing government contracts a lot is government contracts are not short term. You get a contract with the government, it's generally 3 years long with two 1-year optional add-ons or extensions if they so choose. So that means you get a contract. You could actually have a contract for 5 years, and the government does pay well, but it sure is a hassle getting that contract. All right, so right after A+, get some time under your belt, working on desktops and helping computers or people fix their computers and do whatever. You really should start to learn a little bit more about how the computer connects to the rest of the world. Like this wire coming out of the computer, it goes to where, and what happens at the where it goes to. So this is really CCNA routing and switching. And as a part of taking that test, what's really going to happen is you're going to learn more about the network, how networking works, subnetting, the OSI model, and things like that. And that's really going to help you support desktop users better as well, especially in the troubleshooting process, because once you start taking and understanding more about CCNA stuff, you'll be like, well, a reboot didn't work, and I'm not sure why you can get to this website but not that website. So maybe there's something else restricting you, and it's not your computer at all. That's some of the areas that this can help. Plus, it just expands your mindset. Now, again, if you take a test and there's a very similar test that is only going to make you look better on your resume, I obviously is going to suggest you always take that test too. So if you've taken past the CCNA test, the very next test I would suggest you take is the CompTIA Network Plus test. There is a crazy amount of overlap. And in my opinion, the Network Plus test is easier than the CCNA test. It's just something to consider. And again, government work, if you want to do government work, the Network Plus is going to be something that's going to help you get that job. All right, so right after that, we talked about desktops. We talked about what desktops plug into. you're probably going to want to start understanding a little bit more about the environment you're in. Start thinking about servers and so on. So you want to consider starting down the Microsoft path in relation to certifications and get your MCP. Now you can get your MCP in a variety of different areas, and you may actually want to, as a part of supporting the user, you may want to get an MCP in supporting the desktop operating system. It's certainly possible. So consider that now. But at this point, you're also at the area where you need to understand a little bit more about the why. So, for example, a user has a problem, they submit a ticket, you go fix the problem, you close the ticket, but why did you do that? Besides the fact that somebody said you have to go do it. So this is why we're suggesting the ITIL tests that you should consider, and there's a variety of them, but at least the foundational material, so you can understand the why and understand things like service level agreements and service catalogs and all the other aspects of the why you're doing something, as opposed to just some user submitting a ticket and they're pissed off and they expect you to fix it, but they don't understand the why. All right, and then naturally moving over to the right of the MCP, we have the Cloud Plus. In the today's world, everything's going to the cloud or already there, or it's going to be there. So starting to understand more about the cloud environment's super important. And again, anything with a plus sign after it is pretty much going to be CompTIA. So Cloud Plus. And then after that, if you have any one of these jobs in here, you're probably going to be like a LAN tech, a desktop support tech, things like that. You might be a junior router administrator if you have your CCNA and so on, but you'll have those titles. After that, you really want to expand your Microsoft knowledge. Consider more about what you can do around servers, how you can support servers, implement servers, build out, deploy servers, things like that. So you want to start looking at your MCSA and MCSE paths or track, and build out, the timeline that, or not the timeline, the experience and the certifications in relation to getting, those certifications, so you can expand your skill set in supporting more than just the desktop user or doing low-level network support stuff. So here's where you have the potential of kind of deviating a little bit. So after you take your MCSA tests and so on, and you start down your MCSE path, if this would be the point where if you say, hey, I want to do database administration, then you would do that by taking the MCSE database tests. That will prepare you for that. Regardless, though, if you're going to get your MCSE, you're going to have to do a lot of command line stuff, PowerShell things, and so on. So if you're going to do that, you're going to also probably, if you're going to deal with servers, you're probably going to eventually start dealing with Linux servers and so on. So that's why we're suggesting, studying and taking the Linux Plus test, is because I don't know of any company that has only Microsoft servers and they only do everything by Microsoft, and there's not some injection of VMware somewhere, or maybe a Linux server that's hosting 20 VMs on it, or maybe there's a Linux cluster. It could be anything. So understanding Linux more at this point and getting more command line experience is super, super valuable to you. But what's also valuable, around this area, once you're at this area, you start having these certifications, you're probably also not going to be that low-level guy that's, following orders instead of giving orders. You're probably going to give some orders, and you're probably going to be responsible for some things. I don't know any MCSE that did not have a project assigned to him at some point that he had to manage. So if that's the case, it seems logical that you should start understanding how projects work and go, consider the Project Plus test, so you can evaluate, take the skills you would get from, studying and taking the Project Plus test and going down and managing projects effectively. Because in the end, especially if you're leading other people, if they don't think you're a strong leader or you have a handle on the project, they're going to slack off. And once they start doing that, the project's going to suffer. And once that happens, there's only one person who's going to get yelled at, and that's going to be you. So understand projects, project management, things like that is super important, and the Project Plus test is good to know. All right, and again, you want to mature with time. You want to do better so you can get more money, get a raise or whatever. You already have some CCNA stuff, network stuff, and so on. So it might be a good idea at this point to start consider how can you support those servers better. Is the network engineer guy who's configuring routing and switching, does he really know what he's doing? Why do my servers have latency? You know, all sorts of things. So you might want to consider the CCNP routing and switching tests that you can do. And notice I say CCNP routing and switching is 2 tests, and then MCSE is roughly 7 tests. Unless I specifically say a number of tests, then it's really just 1 test, with an exception. The CCNA stuff, generally, some people take that in 2 tests, part 1, part 2, or ICND 1 and ICND 2. You can, however, take the CCNA test in 1 sitting if you so choose to do that. It's up to you if you want. All right, and then after the CCNP test, you've knocked those out. I would suggest you look at Security Plus, because you need to understand more about the security. Sure, you're going to learn about security and passwords and encryption and things like that as a part of everything leading up to that point, but there's a whole lot more you're not going to get into, like SQL injection attacks, or why you have to do data validation in certain fields on SQL databases, things like that. So if you take the CCNP and do the Security Plus, it might be a good idea to do the CCNP or CCNA security, because there's a tremendous amount of overlap between anything CCNP and anything CCNA. So I would suggest the CCNA security, and then if you're really interested in it, then knock out your CCNP for security as well. And again, at this point, you know, you've matured, you've had a job, you've been doing this for a few years now. You're either a consultant and doing your own thing, or you're working for a company that is large or small. Any way you look at it, though, those companies want to be in the cloud, and they're either going to have AWS, Google, or Azure. And I don't know why I didn't put Azure in here, but that's another one. Or they might be using low tier cloud environments like Linode or DigitalOcean or whatever. The end result, though, they're going to want to go to the cloud, or they're going to want to be in the cloud, to stay in the cloud, or they're going to try to figure out how to get to the cloud. It all depends, but the reality of it is that you need to, at some point, if you're going to be in the cloud actively, you need to understand how the cloud works. So you might want to consider the various certifications for whatever cloud environment, you know, your company is in. And then having said that, if you have a fairly large company, you might have cloud, which actually every company is probably having cloud now, but you also might have a data center, either a data center that you're renting space in, or maybe you work for a data center company, or maybe your company is so large that it has its own data center. And if that's the case, then it's probably not a bad idea to get your CCNP in data center itself, you know, to help out, to learn more and be more valuable to the company and ask for raises. Now, the Mac Daddy of all Cisco certs is the CCIE. I've trained CCIEs to be CCIEs. I used to teach the Cisco courses. The CCIE, in my opinion, is the top tier in relation to networking and technology. Most CCIEs know servers better than MCSEs anyways. And CCIE is a valuable certification to have. I've known CCIEs that were making $350,000, $400,000 a year as a CCIE, but they earned that money, no doubt, and they earned their CCIE in the first place because this is a hands-on test. The reason people find CCIE so difficult is because the hands-on portion of the test. So now, can you go from nothing, from zero, all the way up here, you know, fresh out of high school, saying I want to be a CCIE and go take the CCIE test? Sure, you could try. It's just money, right? And if you pass it, then you'll be a legit CCIE because they don't hand those certifications out. But is it going to be hard? Absolutely. It's going to be extremely difficult. Would it be easier if you followed another path and got a lot of experience and then took your CCIE test? Absolutely, it would be a lot easier. And it'd probably save you some money and some headaches from failing the test more than once. All right, so that's that. All right, so moving on over to the cybersecurity side. Kind of the same concepts. Cybersecurity, you don't necessarily start out doing cybersecurity. You have to understand some of the underlying aspects of it. And that really is going to be, how does the network work? What is the OSI model? What is the VLAN? How are passwords configured? Things like that. So realistically, you kind of want to start with Network Plus. But having said that, there's a tremendous amount of command lines that have to be understood. And again, so Linux Plus is recommended. And then after that, you're going to want to know a little bit more about Network Plus. And there's a tremendous amount of overlap between Network Plus and CCNA anyways. So you kind of should consider taking the CCNA test. Now, one thing I do want to point out, on the left, we had the networking and desktop support track, and you'll see a lot of similarities. So for example, Linux Plus is here and it's also there. Network Plus is here and it's over here. There's nothing to prevent you, if you started down this path, there's nothing to prevent you like somewhere in here going, you know what, I think I'd like to start into cybersecurity, and then just jumping over. Sure, there's some things that you're going to have to do to adjust and learn and change, but there's no reason why you couldn't do that. And it gives you a lot of flexibility. And vice versa, if you're in cybersecurity and for some crazy reason you wanted to go into network engineering, you simply could just move on over. But again, you're still going to have to take some tests and get some experience and so on. Anyways, back to cybersecurity. So after taking the CCNA routing and switching, because you're in cybersecurity, I would recommend the CCNA security, which is obvious on what that is. But there's a lot of overlap between CCNA security and CCNA routing and switching. In fact, I would say there's probably a 80% overlap from Network Plus to CCNA routing and security, and probably a 30 to 40% overlap between CCNA routing and, routing and switching. I keep saying routing and security. Routing and switching with CCNA security. Having said that, if you pass the CCNA security test, immediately go take that CompTIA Security Plus test. And then also, for the same reasons I mentioned on ITIL, why are you doing things? Start taking your ITIL test. Get that ITIL foundation class out of the way so you can understand the requirements behind why you're doing things, as opposed to just doing them because somebody told you. All right, and if you're in this area, you're probably going to be viewed as an analyst or maybe a firewall administrator or junior security engineer, things like that. Titles are titles. You could call yourself Batman if you wanted. It's what you do is important. All right, moving on down the line, though. Then we have the CYSA. So basically, that's the CompTIA cybersecurity analyst. And then, obviously there's probably going to be a little bit of a pay raise moving up into that. And for the same reasons, I mentioned before, and why you should understand Project Plus. Now, in this case, though, I have A+ here. That's kind of a hit or miss in some cases. If you're fairly experienced with computers in general, you probably could avoid taking the A+. But if you were a person who is regurgitates test answers very well, then you might want to get the A+ cert, so you understand more about the how a computer works. It'll help you in relation to some things that you'll be doing. And then once you've done that, I kind of suggest taking the ISACA-CISA tests and the ISACA-CISM test. So the CISA test is an auditor test. It teaches you how to audit things, how to trust but verify, that concept in relation to whatever. And the reason why you're going to want to do that is because there'll be some regulatory items for a company that they have to comply with. And having this certification and being in cybersecurity is going to help out, either if you're acting as an internal auditor, auditing some other team or whatever, or if you're acting as an internal audit support and you're auditing your own team. That helps give credibility to the team, but it also gives you opportunity for a pay raise. Now the CSIM test, though, that's different. This is management, information security management. And what that is basically they test you on how you manage an information security environment. So at this point, if you've started here and you've kind of moved up, you're probably either in a junior management role or a senior management role, or maybe there's just not enough people and you are the manager for all roles. Who knows? But if you're going to take the CSIM test, then right after that, I would suggest you take the ISO 27032 test, which is the same kind of thing. It's just that it's an ISO test on information security management as opposed to an ISACA test on information security management. So you're probably going, well, why would I need two different certs for the same subject? It's simple, it's money. When you go to apply for a job or you're looking for a raise or whatever, if you're applying for a job, the more certs you have, the more likely you are you're going to get that job. If you're applying for a raise, quite often the company's going to say, what have you done lately? You can say, well, I just went and got my ISO 27032. And I've added one more cert to the list that helps this company grow and profit and do better. All of that's important. So a lot of it really depends on how you're monetizing yourself. Now, after you do that, again, to expand your horizons, be more valuable to either clients or company, I would suggest you go with the ISO 27001 certification, which is, again, an auditor certification. It's somewhat similar to the CISA cert, but it's more along the lines of auditing the ISO 27001 environment. And it also does make you look better. If you're going to do that, and again, or if you're working in the Department of Defense or DoD contracts or something, I highly suggest the CMMC RP or Registered Practitioner certification. In some cases, you won't be doing any work unless you have that, much like you won't be doing any government work if you don't have some CompTIA certifications. All right, then we get closer, farther down, we get to the top tier of cybersecurity certifications. I think internationally it's recognized that the CISSP is the highest tier of certifications for cybersecurity. It does have some flaws, though, and I'll talk about those in a minute. So you obviously want to eventually end up getting that. And there's also another one from ISC Squared for cloud security, which is the CCSP. And your titles for this area would, could be like auditor, senior auditor, risk manager, or CISO, for that matter. Now, in relation to the CISSP test, much like the CCIE test, if you wanted to, you could go take that test right off the bat. Just go right out and do it. There's a little bit more requirements than just passing the test, like you have to show verifiable experience, you have to have references, things like that. But the reality of it is, if you want to go take that CISSP test right off the bat, you could. But that's the problem. In my opinion, that's the problem with the CISSP program in general. In that, there's a phrase among CISSPs is their knowledge is a mile wide, comparing it to a river, is a mile wide, but an inch deep, which means they know a whole lot of stuff about a whole lot of things. Actually, let me rephrase that. They know a whole lot of things, but not a whole lot of stuff about those things. So they know just enough to get by. And I have some issues with that personally. I've met some paper tiger CISSPs that had no clue what they were doing. In fact, one guy was so out of the loop on cybersecurity. I asked him, true story, I asked him where in the OSI model are IP addresses found. He did not know, which is depressing, especially if you're going to be a CISSP or you're going to be in a role where you have to consult and provide advice to people like, well, you need to strengthen this ACL in your firewall because it's not really compliant and you can't actually help them. You just have to give them, vague advice on that. Anyways, back to this paper tiger CISSP. I then sent him to CCNA boot camp, and when he came back, he was amazed at how much you had to know in order to be a CCNA, and he literally said that was the hardest class I ever took. So, paper tiger, mill in some cases. Now, does that mean that you're going to get, you're going to get caught if you were to say you had all this experience, or maybe put down some people as references and, gave them money to, be a reference for you, that doesn't mean you're going to get caught. But any test you take is going to have an ethics statement to it. And once you start working in cybersecurity or penetration testing for that matter, once you start doing that and you're found out, then you could be blacklisted from the community, and you don't really want to do that. All right, so moving on over to the pen testing side. Pen testing is kind of a unique animal in itself. It has some interesting factors to it. The thing about pen testing is that every bit of pen testing is not every bit. A large majority of pen testing is going to be based around the Kali Linux operating system, which is Linux, obviously Kali Linux. It's Debian based, but it's based around that. So if you don't have experience on the command line or Linux or anything else, then obviously the very first thing you need to do is take the Linux Plus test, because that test is going to help you with Kali, and you're going to use Kali for all of your pen testing activities anyways. And especially farther down when we talk about OSCP and all this other good stuff, that's all Kali. So you have to understand how to use Linux, the command line. You have to be extremely comfortable with the command line. And there's a lot of Microsoft keyboard warriors out there that basically get lost once their mouse breaks, and they bang it on the table. Why isn't my mouse moving? Well, maybe you shouldn't be using the mouse. Maybe you should use the keyboard. In fact, when I was teaching Cisco courses, I forbade my students from using any graphical environment. Everything had to be command line, because I wanted to make sure that they knew how to do that. So anyways, Linux Plus would be a plus for you. See what I did there? But if you're not familiar with computers, if you're going to be a pen tester, you really need to understand computers, like how hard drives work, disks, like the sectors and the heads and things like that, because you may want to create a space on the hard drive that is invisible to the operating system, but you know where it's at, so you can put data there and then mark it as hidden. And there's ways to do that with in the pen testing world. So you probably should consider the A+ test, which will help you understand more about like sectors and heads and hard drives and IRQs, and how you can possibly exploit that for pen testing purposes. All right, so then moving on, after that, you really should take the Security Plus test, which has some basic pen testing in it. Extremely basic, don't get me wrong, but it will help you. And much like everything else that I've been kind of spouting out about anything CompTIA based, is that all of these tests right here help you get your foot in the door for government contracts. And you really want to get your foot in the door on a contract as fast as you can. Why? Because you get paid for it, and people like money. So after you take the Security Plus test, I would suggest that you look at the CCNA security test, because there is a lot of overlap. There's also command line that you're going to have to do in relation to like firewall configurations and so on. But that shouldn't be a problem for you, because you've already got Kali Linux experience. You took your Linux Plus test and passed it, and so on. All right, and much like I said over here on the network support side, if you take a CCNA test, you want to really take the Network Plus test as well. So Network Plus right after that, and then right after that, study and take the Pen Test Plus test, which is the actual first real solely focused on pen testing test that you would take. And that's certainly going to help your income, your resume, your marketability, things like that. And I did forget, if you're in this area, then probably you're going to be viewed as an analyst, a junior analyst, an analyst, maybe on the incident response team, things like that. And then down here, once you start passing these tests, specifically that one, then you'll probably be titled as junior pen tester, or however people title junior pen testers, working under the supervision of a more experienced person who's mentoring you and training you and so on. But you're actually doing pen testing at this point. Now, does that mean that up here, you're not going to do pen testing? Sure, there's a chance of that. Once a senior pen tester figures out that you have a desire to learn pen testing, I think they probably would invite you to be involved in some of the pen tests. so you can get more knowledge faster. That's, the whole idea of this is knowledge transfer and get people up to speed faster. All right, now here though, junior pen tester, you really start to need to expand your pen testing skill set. So the very next cert we're suggesting is the CEH, Certified Ethical Hacker. And that is a good cert to have. It's it teaches you a little bit more, but not as much as these other ones down below. But you do learn a lot about ethical hacking, denial of service, the different tools that can be used by script kiddies and so on. And actually during the actual Certified Ethical Hacker course, you actually do hack your other students. So you see real hand what it's like to be attacked, how to defend yourself and so on. But it's a good cert to have in general. I recommend it. And obviously in this area, anything you're going to be doing is you'll be a full-fledged pen tester at that point. Just how experienced as a full-fledged pen tester you are varies. And also at this point, you might be leading pen test teams. So for the same reason I mentioned on all the other ones, you really need to have some project management experience at this point, so you can help control the cost of the pen test, making sure you're meeting timelines and things like that. So Project Plus is always a plus. All right, after that we have the OSCP test, which is from offensive security. In fact, all of these tests in here are from offensive security. So that's kind of like the first test you should consider from offensive security, in my opinion. It's a fairly difficult test. A lot of these other tests, they might take an hour or 2 or 3 or 4. This OSCP test is 24 hours in duration. So not only do you have to know your stuff, you're going to get tired as a part of taking the test, and they're going to give you a task to do. And then once you've done that task, you've either done it at the end of 24 hours or you haven't. And you have to write a report as well in there. But you've either done that or you haven't. And if you haven't, then you're not certified. If you have, then awesome, you are certified. But it's kind of a pretty good, it's a very good test to take. And I would recommend everybody consider that if you want to be a professional pen tester. Now the other ones, OCSE and OCS or OSWE and so on, if you have those, that's awesome. But realistically, you're going to, much like on the Microsoft side where you figure out if you want to be a database administrator or something, you're going to figure that out, somewhere over here. Well, over here, if you want to do mostly web exploitation, then you might take the OSCP test and then the OSWE test. Or whatever. You're going to figure out your testing order that you want to take based on what you want to do. And at this point, again, you'll be a full-fledged pen tester. Now, down at the bottom of the cybersecurity, I have start pen testing path. You could start the pen testing path anywhere you want. And if you're over here on the IT side, IT LAN support side, and you want to go straight to pen testing, sure, you could jump ship and just move on over. There's nothing to prevent you from doing that. Obviously, if you're going to be a pen tester, you're probably going to have an easier time of it if you have some networking background. I don't know any pen tester that did not understand how networks worked in advance of being a pen tester, because it's part of the requirements. You can't do VLAN hopping without understanding what VLANs are, for example. Things like that. All right, now adding in a little bit more, I also threw in the dollar amounts you can expect. $4 signs, more money; $1 sign, less money. Well, naturally so. You're starting out here. You're not going to make $4 signs of cash if you're just starting out. So this is kind of the path that you could expect, making more money. Now, as an individual, the network architect or CCIE, they can make a lot of money. And as your experience and reputation is out there, you certainly can make a lot of money as a pen tester. But what I do want to point out is this one title right here, CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, and that has $5 signs. Woohoo! Why $5 signs? Because generally, all of these other roles and positions at some point will either report to or interact with the CISO in some way or another. So that means that a lot of times, like for example, this entire pen testing track will probably report to the CISO, even though it's an entirely different area. This whole thing under cybersecurity will probably report to the CISO, even though it's an entirely different area. So if you're going to be the boss over a large majority of responsibility and people, you probably are going to get paid a lot more money than any one of the other ones in here. The only exception I can think of, though, would possibly be a CCIE, which might probably could make a lot more money than a CISO, but not have the same level of responsibility and authority. All right, and with that, obviously, here at Arrakis Consulting, we do teach courses. We offer numerous courses, so you can press pause in a minute, or back up a little bit. You can see the courses we teach. But any course that has a Arrakis logo over the top, we can teach. Some courses are accredited, meaning that you get CE credits out of it. Any of the ISO courses we teach will be accredited, which means you can apply those CE credits towards other certifications. If it's not accredited, then it's really just a boot camp, and it's preparing you for two things. One is passing the certification test. Two is preparing you for the job you would do with that certification. So what we don't want to have happen is, again, take CCNA for example, is somebody go in and they just practice, configuring the time or access control lists on a router, or setting up a VPN on a firewall, and then they've trained themselves to test to the test environment as opposed to what real life is. Because I can promise you, the test environment is not real life. It's what Cisco wants you to know in relation to taking and passing the test. So there's nothing to prevent people from getting test banks or anything else and practicing for a test for the sole purpose of passing it, but then not have any actual experience that allows them to support having a job and so on. So with that, thanks everyone for your time, and looking forward to it. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can. It's in the bottom right-hand corner where the Arrakis logo is. And if you have any questions or you'd like to reach out for some training or some consultative advice, or just you need help in some sort of area, feel free to reach out to sales@arrakisconsulting.com. And with that, I appreciate everybody's time. Thank you very much, and I will see you for the next video.